April 13th, 1919, Amritsar. When we look back at the churning gears of the British Empire, there are these specific, undeniable breaking points. Today, we're unpacking one of the most pivotal and, frankly, most devastating moments in modern history, the Jallianwala Bagh Massacre. To really grasp the gravity of this single day, we have to understand the immense weight of broken promises that led right up to it. So let's dive into this explainer.
Okay, put yourself in the scene. The atmosphere here is completely joyous. It's Baisakhi, the spring harvest festival. For Punjab, this is literally one of the biggest, most anticipated days of the whole year. You've got thousands of men, women, and kids who have traveled from all these surrounding rural villages, just gathering in this open dirt field known as Jallianwala Bagh. Now, mixed into this festive crowd, there are also folks holding a peaceful meeting to protest the recent arrest of their local leaders. But for the most part, families are just sitting on the dusty ground, chatting and celebrating. They are completely and tragically unaware of the military force that is mobilizing just a few streets away.
And here is the horrifying reality. In exactly 10 minutes, that ground is going to turn red. Just minutes away from this completely peaceful scene, armed British soldiers are getting ready to march right into that enclosure. There's not going to be a warning, no order to disperse, literally no chance for these families to escape. The soldiers are just going to raise their rifles and open fire into the absolute thickest parts of the civilian crowd. And when the deafening sound of that gunfire finally stops, the earth is going to be soaked in tragedy. Which brings us to a massive historical question. Was this event just a horrific instance of localized military overreach? Or was this the exact fatal moment the British Empire permanently lost the trust of millions of Indians? To really grasp the magnitude of what happened that afternoon, we need to rewind the clock just a bit. We have to look at the systemic fractures and the deep-rooted betrayals that set the stage for this exact moment.
Think about the buildup here. Between 1914 and 1918, millions of Indian soldiers fought, bled, and died for the British Empire in World War I. And back home, the Indian public contributed staggering amounts of money, crops, and resources to keep the war effort going. So when the war finally wrapped up in 1918, there was this massive, totally reasonable expectation. Hey, we made these immense sacrifices. Surely this means greater political autonomy and some new civil rights, right? Wrong. Instead, in 1919, the British government slapped them with draconian laws that completely shattered any hope of a fair post-war settlement. The foundation of trust wasn't just cracking, it was completely falling apart.
The absolute worst of these measures was something called the Rowlatt Act. Now imagine a law that gives the government the power to arrest anyone without a trial, no evidence presented, no hearing in front of a judge. They didn't even have to tell you what crime you supposedly committed. You could just disappear into a cell. As you might guess, this total suspension of basic civil liberties sparked nationwide fury. It actually prompted Mahatma Gandhi to call for a satyagraha, a massive peaceful campaign of civil disobedience. The whole country was starting to simmer, but one specific region was already boiling over. That region was Punjab, and specifically the city of Amritsar. Amritsar wasn't just a dot on a map. It was the vibrant, beating heart of Punjab. It was this massive hub for trade and deeply, deeply significant for religion. And almost overnight, it became the epicenter of political resistance. Local leaders, guys like Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal, were incredibly organized. They were successfully, and importantly, peacefully mobilizing the masses against the Rowlatt Act. But the British colonial administration, they didn't see citizens asking for basic human rights. They saw a direct existential threat to their control. So the spark hits the powder keg on April 10th. Acting purely out of fear, British authorities secretly arrest Dr. Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal, deporting them with zero public notice. While when the news leaked, and of course it leaked, absolute outrage erupted. Thousands of citizens flooded the streets demanding their leaders back. And things spiraled fast. Peaceful protests dissolved into violent clashes, government buildings got smashed up, and several European citizens were tragically attacked and killed. The colonial administration panicked. They completely misread the situation, assuming these localized, chaotic riots were actually the opening shots of a highly organized, province-wide rebellion. And when an empire panics, what do? They send in the military. Enter Brigadier General Reginald Dyer. He's called into Amritsar to, quote-unquote, restore order. Dyer is absolutely convinced that a massive uprising is already underway, so he immediately takes command of the city and imposes strict martial law. The normal rules of a functioning society, totally gone, out the window. And one of the very first things he does is issue a total, uncompromising ban on all public gatherings and assemblies.
This is where a catastrophic disconnect happens, a fatal miscommunication. In General Dyer's reality, he's issued this strict military decree banning gatherings, and he expects absolute compliance. Period. But the people's reality, it's vastly different. Remember, it's April 13th, the biggest festival of the year. Thousands of villagers are literally pouring into the city from the countryside. Without modern communication, no smartphones, no instant news alerts, the vast majority of these families have absolutely no idea that gathering in public is now a punishable offense. They are walking completely blind right into a military trap.
Which brings us right back to that dusty afternoon at Jallianwala Bagh. And we have to talk about the physical layout of this space because it is absolutely crucial. The bog is surrounded on almost all sides by high, solid brick walls from the backs of adjacent buildings. The entrances, they're incredibly narrow. Some are so tight that a standard armored vehicle can't even squeeze through them. So you have 10 to 15,000 completely unaware men, women, and children settling into what is essentially an enclosed bottleneck. And just outside those narrow alleyways, General Dyer and his heavily armed troops are marching closer. So how does this fateful convergence actually unfold? Think about it. You've got an enclosed space, a massive, dense crowd expecting a joyous festival, and a military officer who arrives specifically to punish defiance, literally holding the power of life and death in his hands. The pieces are locked into place for one of history's absolute darkest hours. What happens the exact second General Dyer steps through that narrow alleyway and looks out at those thousands of innocent faces? Well, that tragic collision of events is exactly what we'll be uncovering in the next part of our explainer.